Carney warns, U.S. democracy fracture by Trump.
This is not just a headline. It's a warning. A signal that the cracks in American democracy are no longer hairline fractures, they are deep, visible, and growing. And when Mark Carney, Canada's Prime Minister and former global financial leader, makes such a claim, the world listens. Because this isn't coming from an activist or a partisan critic. It's coming from someone who has spent decades studying how systems hold together, and how they fall apart. So what does Carney mean when he suggests democracy in Trump's America has fractured? First, look at the rhetoric itself. For Carney, words are chosen carefully. He doesn't say challenged. He doesn't say tested. He says fractured. That implies something fundamental has broken. Something that may not be easily repaired. He is pointing to the idea that democratic institutions in the United States, courts, elections, checks and balances, are not functioning the way they were designed to. Second, there is the influence of Trump. Carney has repeatedly accused Trump of trying to break us so that America can own us. That phrase, directed at Canada, reveals what he believes is happening inside the U.S. as well, a deliberate effort to weaken trust in systems, to erode norms, and to replace cooperation with domination. In Carney's framing, Trump thrives on disruption, on shaking faith in rules and institutions. And when citizens lose confidence in those rules, democracy itself begins to crack. Third, Carney draws attention to the relationship between Canada and the United States. He frames it as being under unprecedented strain. Tariffs and economic threats aren't just about trade, they are political weapons. When a leader uses trade, diplomacy, or alliances not to strengthen ties but to pressure and control, it undermines democratic values of partnership and respect. Carney positions Canada as a country that must defend its sovereignty not just economically, but politically, against a U.S. administration that no longer plays by democratic norms. Fourth, Carney's critique goes beyond borders. When he says democracy is fracturing in America, he implies a global consequence. Because the U.S. has long positioned itself as the beacon of democracy, the model others look to. If that model collapses, if American democracy becomes more about power plays than principles, then the ripple effects are worldwide. Trust in alliances weakens. Confidence in global institutions declines. Authoritarian leaders gain strength by pointing to U.S. dysfunction as proof that democracy doesn't work. Carney is also using his own credibility to frame this debate. Remember, this is a man who has navigated global crises, from the 2008 financial crash to international banking reforms. He understands systems under stress. So when he applies that lens to politics, he is essentially diagnosing America as a system breaking down. Now let's look at the campaign context. Carney leveraged this message of resilience during his rise to power in Canada. While Trump's style has been bombastic, threatening, and filled with blunt slogans, Carney presented himself as the sober alternative. His competence, often described as bland, suddenly became appealing because it contrasted so sharply with Trump's unpredictability. By highlighting America's fractures, Carney positioned himself as the leader who could keep Canada steady in a storm. But Carney's warning isn't just about campaign strategy. It's about sovereignty and survival. His words, "Canada is not for sale," underline his belief that democracy is more than ballots and speeches, it is independence. If Trump's America uses economic leverage, political threats, and annexation talk to dominate Canada, then that's not democracy. That's coercion. And resisting it becomes a democratic duty. Carney also links these fractures to trade and tariffs. Trump has used tariffs not as tools of negotiation, but as instruments of punishment. This, Carney argues, is part of a broader strategy: weaken Canada's economy, divide its politics, and then exploit the cracks. He suggests that what America does to others is a reflection of what is happening inside its own borders, a democracy turning into a tool for control, rather than a framework for cooperation. And then there is the idea of betrayal. Carney frames the U.S. not as a historical adversary, but as a partner that has broken trust. He speaks of Canada being shocked by U.S. aggression, but now moving past the shock to vigilance. We are over the shock, but we won't forget. That line captures the essence of a fractured democracy. Once trust is broken, it can never return to what it was. You may still work together, but suspicion lingers forever. Carney's comments also hint at a new world order. He says openly that the old trading system, with the U.S. at its center, is gone. If democracy in America is fractured, Canada cannot remain dependent. It must diversify its alliances, build stronger ties elsewhere, and create resilience independent of Washington's decisions. In other words, Canada cannot put its future in the hands of a neighbor that no longer embodies stability. The fracture is not just about politics, it's about identity. America has long projected itself as the champion of democracy, but Carney suggests that identity is slipping. When leaders openly challenge elections, when courts are politicized, when truth is dismissed as fake news, the foundations crack. And when those cracks widen, what stands on top, democracy itself, risks collapse. For Carney, the message is clear: Canada must not only defend its own sovereignty, it must also adjust to a world where the United States is no longer the reliable democratic anchor it once was. The fracture south of the border changes everything. When Carney uses the word fractured, he is not talking about a temporary crack that can be patched up with an election or a change of policy. He is describing something structural. A fracture means the foundation itself is damaged. Even if repairs are made, the weakness remains. And this is exactly how he views democracy under Trump's America, weakened to a point where it no longer functions as it once did. Consider the pillars of American democracy: the rule of law, the independence of institutions, the respect for elections, and the peaceful transfer of power. Carney suggests that each of these has been shaken. He points to the erosion of trust in the electoral process, with conspiracy theories overshadowing facts. He highlights how political pressure has seeped into courts and legislatures, turning institutions that once stood above partisanship into battlegrounds. And he warns that when leaders encourage division instead of unity, the very concept of democracy begins to splinter. This fracture is not invisible. It shows itself in a divided society, where half the population questions the legitimacy of the other half. It shows in the normalization of threats, where political opponents are treated as enemies, not rivals. And it shows in foreign policy, where allies are treated as bargaining chips, not partners. Carney sees these trends not as isolated events, but as evidence of a system breaking apart from within. For Canada, this is more than an observation. It is a reality that cannot be ignored. A fractured democracy in the United States means unpredictability on Canada's doorstep. It means policies that shift overnight, agreements that are broken without warning, and economic decisions that serve political theater rather than stability. For a country so closely tied to its southern neighbor, this is a direct challenge to sovereignty and security. Carney's warning is also a challenge to Canadians themselves. If democracy can fracture in America, it can fracture anywhere. No country is immune. He is pushing Canadians to realize that their own system must be protected, strengthened, and renewed. Because relying on America as the guarantor of democratic values is no longer safe. And then there is the global picture. Carney knows the world watches the United States as a test case. If democracy fractures there, authoritarian regimes gain a powerful argument that democracy is fragile, chaotic, and doomed to fail. China, Russia, and others will point to America's divisions as proof that their systems are stronger. In this sense, the fracture is not just an American crisis, it is a global one. Carney's approach is blunt but strategic. By openly calling out the fracture, he forces a conversation many try to avoid. He is not saying America is finished. He is saying America is broken in ways that must be acknowledged before they can be repaired. And in the meantime, Canada cannot wait, cannot depend, and cannot assume. This is why he speaks of betrayal and vigilance. The betrayal is the realization that a trusted ally has changed, perhaps permanently. The vigilance is the reminder that Canada must adapt, must diversify, and must build resilience in a world where even the strongest democracy can fall to internal fracture. So when Carney hints that democracy in Trump's America has fractured, he isn't just analyzing another country's politics. He is issuing a warning to Canadians and to the world. A warning that democracy cannot be taken for granted, not even in the place that once called itself the leader of the free world. And in that fracture lies both danger and opportunity. Danger, because instability spreads; opportunity, because nations like Canada can step forward and chart a new, independent path.